Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly. We invite you to connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. Use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. We also encourage you to post any questions you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box, as we'll be dedicating some time towards the end of the conversation to respond to those. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as slides and any resources, will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. And before we begin, I'd like to call your attention to our upcoming webinars. Later this afternoon at 3 p.m., we have a session on safety and belonging first, advancing well-being for learning recovery. And the rest of November will bring some exciting co-sponsored sessions, starting with one co-sponsored by EdWeek on how school districts can benefit from public housing partnerships on November 22nd. And on November 29th, we'll have a session co-sponsored by New America titled Play, Academics, and Relationships, Teaching in Ways Kindergartners Learn Best. Registration and information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra. You caught me right as I was having to cough. Welcome, everyone. We are delighted that you could all join us for today's Funder to Funder conversation, co-sponsored by Overdeck Family Foundation. Today's session focuses on an incredibly important and timely topic: early care and learning and the impact that professional development for early learning educators can have on ensuring high-quality environments for our youngest learners. While the science is clear on the importance of the early years, it is also clear that the pandemic wreaked havoc on the childcare sector. In this moment, when many childcare programs were forced to close during the pandemic and those that remained open are struggling to retain their staff, we will explore funding strategies and innovative models that can both increase retention and foster high-quality early learning environments that prepare children for success. As a Funder to Funder conversation, we will be joined today by three philanthropic leaders who are investing in early care and learning, and hear them discuss their funding strategies and approaches. Afterwards, we'll have the opportunity to hear from three education leaders, as they will share how their innovative models can engage and empower early learning educators. And to begin that conversation, I'm incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our funder panel for today, sharing just very brief bios for each, but I'd encourage everyone to check out the longer bios that were posted as a link in the chat box, because these are amazing philanthropic leaders. First, I'd like to welcome Dana Chaluna, reflecting her deep commitment to Oakland and to children's right to read. Dana's work as an education program officer at Kenneth Rainin Foundation in Oakland is informed by her experiences teaching transitional kindergarten through second grade and serving as an instructional coach, curriculum trainer, and program director. Welcome also to Stephanie Sharp. Stephanie is a program officer at Overdeck Family Foundation, where she supports organizations in the early impact portfolio with a focus on increasing reach, strengthening key capacities, attracting follow-on funding, drawing on her experiences teaching pre-K in Baltimore City Public Schools and working at two ed tech companies. Finally, I'd like to welcome Liz Stevens. Liz brings her 20+ years of experience in supporting children and families through her role as a senior program officer at the Bezos Family Foundation based in Seattle, Washington, where she stewards the foundation's investments to boost parent engagement, transform the early childhood educator field, increase literacy, support the prenatal period, and increase research and insights. So welcome, all three of you. So to set the stage for today's conversation, let's talk about the big problem we're trying to solve here in early childhood. Why is this work important? And Stephanie, let's start with you for this one.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you so much to everyone for joining this conversation and making the time and space to have this really meaningful discussion. Maybe I'll start with just a quick overview of Overdeck. Overdeck Family Foundation is a national funder really focused on enhancing education both inside and outside of the classroom. As Sarah alluded to, the Early Impact portfolio at Overdeck funds organizations that support families and early learning environments and expanding their use of evidence-based practices that are really proven to make a difference in the early lives of children. You asked what the big problem is, and for us, we're really trying to focus and solve the problem of kindergarten readiness. Fewer than half of all kindergartners come to school kindergarten ready, and that really matters because research tells us that the kids who come to school kindergarten ready are more likely to master basic skills by age 11, less likely to drop out of high school, and more likely to reach middle class status by age 40. So how do we make kids kindergarten ready? One of the levers that we're focused on in my grant making portfolio is really ensuring that early learning environments, whether they are formal, center-based, pre-K, Head Start, or informal, those home-based providers, sort of family-friendly neighbor care, that they're high quality. And one of the most impactful ways to do that is through evidence-based instructional materials, teacher professional development, and coaching, which is why we're really focused on funding in this space.
Thanks. Liz, what would you add to that?
So just super briefly, the Bezos Family Foundation focuses on education prenatally through adolescence. And thinking about what the big problem is that today's conversation addresses, and the conversation that I think we're about to have really helps us think about everybody in this room or on this call knows that there's a misalignment between how critical the early childhood period is, a time when kids' brains are making 1 million neural connections every second, and the policy, practice, and funding that goes toward this period. When money is spent, like in early childhood professional development, where over $1 billion is spent nationally each year, the funding isn't necessarily best positioned to help professionals develop tools and skills they need. They don't necessarily help create equitable, high quality learning environments for young people. That's things like culturally relevant practices, family teacher partnership, developing high executive functioning in adults and children. And so I think the opportunity is to really help ensure that the programs, policy, and funding that we're supporting aligns with the science, that we're supporting young people and the adults in their lives during the early childhood period.
Thanks. Dana, what would you add? What about you?
Thanks, Sarah. Glad to be here with everyone. I'm with the Kenneth Rainin Foundation. We are a place-based family foundation in Oakland, and we're really focused on literacy for children ages 0 to 8. And so our North Star is kindergarten readiness as well. We pay a lot of attention to that. And we know that the definition of kindergarten readiness can vary slightly from place to place. But I think we all acknowledge in this space that there are several domains in child development that are critical to a child being ready for kindergarten. And we know that supportive interactions with a trusted adult in a safe and supportive care setting is instrumental in supporting the development across those domains and mitigating things like trauma and developmental delays. And we think about all of those different domains that are so critical to a child's development. They're numerous, right? And so it's not an easy task. And that's where professional development is absolutely critical, because just as there's no parenting handbook that I've come across, I'd love it if you have one. Our educators in early care settings need support as well. So professional development is absolutely critical to the work.
Thanks for that. And if you find that parenting handbook, let's share it all around. Yeah. So I mentioned this briefly in my opening, but we've all seen the dozens and dozens of headlines about the national childcare crisis, with an estimated 10% of the country's programs shutting down during the pandemic. What are you all seeing happening on the ground right now? And since this conversation is really focused on professional development, how much PD do early childhood educators typically receive? Dana, let's stick with you to start this one off.
Sarah, when you ask the question, what we're seeing on the ground, I think the first thing that probably comes to mind for many of us is the fact that we have a lot of early childhood educators leaving the field without necessarily a steady flow of educators to replace them. And so, that's top of mind for, I think, many of us. And I would say that professional development plays a role in retention in our eyes. Professional development supports growth, mastery, motivation that we all have, confidence in our capabilities. And we say that development under the right conditions can actually support a stronger workforce. But what we're seeing on the ground, it really varies by an agency's capacity. By and large, we're noticing that there isn't enough time for educators to engage in the professional development that's often needed to improve practice. And in some cases, PD can be extractive. We think about the time and the place where educators are engaging in professional development. It's often in the evenings, on the weekends, and that can be extractive, pulling resources rather than adding them. So that's kind of what we're seeing.
Stephanie, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Dana, I love everything that you said. I'm like nodding my head vigorously. Beside the obvious of that, the pandemic just, as you said, Sarah, like wreaked havoc on this space overall. Even before the pandemic, though, we were really massively underinvesting in training for early educators and care providers. In NEAR's 2021 State of Preschool, which looked at the quality of 63 state-funded preschool programs across a variety of dimensions, only 18 of those 63 met their definition for supplying quality PD opportunities. And what's interesting about that definition is actually like there's not necessarily a quality piece to it. It's really about time and quantity. And so they define that as at least 15 hours a year with individual PD plans and coaching for teachers and assistants. So 15 hours a year. Only 16 of the 63 or 18 of the 63 programs are meeting 15 hours a year. And you contrast that with what a typical K-12 teacher experiences, which is 68 hours per year. And that's a huge delta. And so you begin to see how we're just continuously underinvesting in these professionals who are really charged with taking care of kids at a time that is so critical. And then I think it's also worth mentioning that earlier this year, when the Tennessee pre-K study results came out, which found not just that the Tennessee program had no impact, but that it actually had a negative impact, I think it could have been kind of easy for some people to start questioning the value of pre-K. But thankfully, that's not what happened. And I think it's not what happened because everyone saw that that program had low quality and that training is a really big part of quality. And so, what we're trying to think of here is pre-K is not going anywhere. Pre-K is definitely not going anywhere. States are going to invest more and more in this. How can we ensure that the money invested here is actually delivering on the promise of pre-K, which is incredibly powerful? And so this teacher training piece really feels like one of those.
Wow, that's incredible. Liz, what would you add?
I really agree too with what my colleagues are saying. And the good news is I see a lot of momentum building right now around compensation and preparation. And I say compensation in this conversation about preparation because we really want to see those two things moving in tandem. There are some bright spots in states like New Mexico and Vermont that are starting to figure out financing models that don't rely on a market-driven system. And I think a system that's not market-driven is much more conducive to a fairly paid workforce. Obviously, we can't ask parents to pay more, So the system of parents paying what it costs to support an early childhood workforce is not sustainable. It's not going to work. And at the same time, there's really good professional development out there. It's exciting because we know what's effective, we know what improves teaching practice, and we have the opportunity to do more of it. It's really important that we ensure accessibility, that we ensure cultural relevancy, and again, that professional development is tied to increased compensation for early childhood educators.
Thanks. So Dana was kind of alluding to this a little bit just a second ago, but according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are 100,000 fewer childcare workers right now than there were prior to COVID-19. I'm wondering, how do you reconcile investing in professional development for early childhood educators when so many are leaving the profession? What impact do you expect to see? And Liz, let's stay with you for this one.
It's a great question. There's two things I would say. One is everyone wants to feel good at their job and to feel supported. And that includes having the tools that you need to be successful in a role. And the other is that as we rebuild the childcare system, it's not the time to compromise on quality. So there's an opportunity in front of us to be intentional about establishing a system that gets the results that we want. I don't think it's the time to be hasty about just getting anybody in early childhood settings. Many children and families and early childhood educators, as we've alluded to already in this conversation, have experienced a great deal of trauma in these last few years. And we know that trusted adults in caring relationships are the context where learning happens. So supporting educators by supporting their well-being and making sure they have the tools and support they need to develop social and emotional skills in young children is really critical. It's always been critical, and it's especially important now. When caregivers are cared for, they can care well for children. And then the other thing is that when professional development is done really well, I think it's a nice bridge to compensation. I'm just repeating myself, but it's so important because when you are working and earning a poverty wage, it's really hard or even impossible to show up as a whole, well individual able to support children in trauma.
Yeah, great points. Dana, what would you add?
I completely agree with everything Liz said. I definitely think as funders, we can push workforce development and compensation efforts. I think it's really important for us to do that and continue to raise that as an alarm. And, you know, as Liz mentioned, now is not the time to sacrifice quality. I worry that sometimes in our conversations about the workforce crisis, that the people who are showing up today and who are going to show up tomorrow are getting lost in those conversations. And, you know, a number of us have said already that professional development can support educators in feeling confident and capable and retaining and sustaining in the work. And so something that we think about as a foundation, the way that we're able to kind of continue investing in professional development while we also tackle this workforce issue, is ensuring that the PD we invest in is supporting conditions for strengthening the workforce and retaining the workforce. And so we really look for four things in professional development providers. One, that the PD is aligned to evidence-based practice. So it's supporting educators' confidence and capability by ensuring that they have the information, the modeling, the practice, the observation and feedback that they really need to improve their practice, right? To Liz's point, we want them to be supported. Two, that it's offered in non-traditional and traditional formats. So we're seeing a lot of success with online and asynchronous options coupled with coaching and communities of practice. And that there's PD offerings outside of the institutions that can be obstacles for some folks looking to enter the workforce. The third criteria is that there's always got to be compensation for folks when they're engaging outside of their work hours, because it is, it can be extractive. And we love job embedded professional development like modeling, elbow teaching, coaching, so observation and feedback, because it's happening in the workplace. There's the direct application right now. It's not as extractive. So those are the 4 things that we look for.
I love it. Thank you. So this is a funder to funder conversation, as I said before. So we need to talk about the funder role in particular in all of this. How do you all see the funder role at this challenging moment in time? We're seeing a lot of states that are beginning to direct larger investments into early educator PD, and to also to focus more on the early childhood years and that sector. So given all of that public funding, how does philanthropy kind of fit into all of this right now? And Dana, let's stay with you on this one. I know that Rainan's investments were really critical in forming Fluent Seeds. Can you tell a little bit about the story there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're so excited about the attention and focus and investment that early childhood is receiving. And so when we first invested in Fluent Seeds in Oakland about 10 years ago, we knew that there wasn't as much funding available locally, and we knew that there was this need for professional development of not only preschool educators, but family-based childcare providers and family friend and neighbor providers as well. And so we went all in, and this is an important thing to think about as funders are experiencing an influx of funding within their communities. Kind of look for where the care is and where the gaps are, so that we as funders can fill those gaps. Because our initial investment included, we tried to remove any obstacles. So we invested in the training and the coaching. So that meant, hiring coaches and funding coach positions, wages for teacher assistants, where we needed more, folks in classrooms and in those care settings. We purchased the materials. We provided stipends for PD because we knew that that it was drawing on people's resources. We paid for meals in those professional development settings. Like, when you think about the professional development and what you want it to achieve, ensuring that you're investing in all of those different elements of professional development is really important. So as your communities are making plans and allocating the funding that's coming in, look for those gaps, and those are the things that we can fund. And then the other thing I would say is we've been funding Fluent Seeds in Oakland for almost 10 years, and we're not planning on stopping. Sometimes it takes 3-4 years for a professional development solution to be deeply embedded in an organization. So, kind of, if you can position your mind for, a long-term investment to really support that solution in being internalized.
Thanks. I like that. The gaps and the patience, both so very critical. Steph, what would you add about the funder role in all of this?
Well, firstly, I feel like I just have to thank Dana for and the Rainan Foundation really for providing that funding for Fluent Seeds. It's just an organization that we're really excited about and see its real potential for impact at scale across the country. But in terms of Overdeck Family Foundation's role, we really structure our grant making to promote innovation and evidence building, and then also growth. We believe that those areas really allow for catalytic impact as the mid-sized funder that we are. We think of some of the whales in this space, like Gates, and fondly refer to ourselves as dolphins. So that's kind of our size that we're at. But we know that governments are obviously the best at providing funds to scale, but without that innovation and evidence, and I think, Liz, you were alluding to this, the wrong things can be supported, which is why we really focus on providing risk capital to our grantees and encourage them to try new things and experiment with flexibility. And then we help them build out and strengthen their evidence base so that we're confident that the model has measurable and positive impact before scaling it. And so we've heard that this role of funding innovation and evidence is especially critical as states work to assess which services and programs can have the most meaningful impact in their local communities. And it's truly where we're trying to find our sweet spot here. There's sort of the impact at depth of programming, which I think is where some of that innovation comes into place, or like, are there lighter touch versions of this model that can have similar impact? And then there's the scaling piece and understanding what's happening.
I love that. And I love the dolphin whale analogy too. What about you, Liz? What would you add to all of that about the funding?
I totally agree. Innovation and gaps where there's energy from communities. I think we have another few roles to play, which is good news. I think one opportunity is to help support a diverse pipeline of leaders in the early childhood space, and that includes folks with experience in early childhood settings. So being intentional about building career ladders where early childhood educators can become leaders in early childhood settings, and then leaders in their community, decision makers, policymakers, and then also supporting pathways to authentic parent and provider engagement, making sure that policymakers are including parents, families, early childhood educators at the decision-making tables. And then I think funders can start building infrastructure. So one example is if policy passes requirements for degrees, making sure that high quality degree programs are available to attend. Starting to build those programs that are accessible to a variety of students, that develop competencies, actually help teachers learn new skills that are immediately applicable in their early learning classrooms, make their job easier and more rewarding. If you're learning something in school that you can take home and apply in your classroom the very next day, and it solves a problem that you were having. Maybe circle time was a really challenging time of day for you. And you learn a skill in your night class that the very next day you can bring to your class and have a better circle time. That makes your professional development experience really rewarding, and it really inspires you to keep going and put energy into something when you might be really scraping the bottom of the barrel. And then seeing an immediate improvement in the culture of a classroom because the teacher has the skills that they need. So all of that is to say, if we have that infrastructure in place so that when policy requires degrees, then it's really a positive experience for teachers to start getting those degrees. The degrees help improve the quality of the education they're providing. And that kind of leads me to my third point, which is that drumbeat around quality, which we keep talking about in this conversation. And I think that's an important role for funders to play. As more money and new policies start to emerge, we can play a role in ensuring that practices are reflective of the science of learning and development.
Great, thank you all. Very important roles that funders can play. And I just encourage folks who are listening in, especially the funders that might be listening in, if any kind of questions are coming to mind as you're hearing all of these insights, please drop them in the Q&A box on your Zoom screen, and we'll be pulling them out and sharing them with all the panelists later on in the conversation. So before we welcome our provider panelists to the conversation, I'd like to invite all of you to offer a quick preview about what we're about to hear. What excites you about the three organizations that we're about to hear from in just a minute? And Liz, let's stay with you for this one. I know that you were an early funder of Tools for the Mind. What drew you to this organization initially, and any other kind of quick thoughts that you might have on the two other featured providers?
Yeah, we were originally drawn to Tools of the Mind because their work is so firmly rooted in the science. We know that children learn through play, that they learn in safe environments with the right kind of structure. They learn from adults who have skills to guide them through their learning. We really appreciate the holistic view of learning. Literacy, STEM, executive function are all interconnected and really reflective of what we know about how children learn. I'd say that's true about all three of these organizations. And both Parent Core and Tools of the Mind specifically are bringing executive function into the mainstream conversation, supporting those as the core competencies that we know they are. And when I say executive function, I mean in adults and children. Adults with executive functioning skills can build executive functioning skills in young people. So I'm really excited about all of these. So excited to welcome them here today.
Thank you. Steph, I know Overdeck supports all three of these organizations that we're about to hear from. What do they reflect that is critical right now in the work to support kids?
I feel like I could speak for 10 minutes about each of these. We're really excited about all three of the organizations. I'm gonna double click on what Liz just said about the importance of executive functioning, and that's really one of the key reasons why we're super excited about Tools of the Mind. Executive functioning is just such a critical building block for later academic success. And quite frankly, there's not enough out there to support executive functioning skills. There just truly aren't enough curriculum or PD resources. So this is a real gap. And so we're really excited to fund them. And they've actually almost doubled their reach since we began funding them in 2021, which is pretty amazing. For Fluent Seeds, they deliver really incredible impact on early literacy skills. And how could that not feel so important to do right now when you look at the NAEP scores? And just 33% of our fourth graders are reading at a proficient level or above. So, you know, when you see something like Fluent Seeds, that studies show that kids participating in it acquire up to 8 additional months of learning, and that there's, you know, it's equal impact across subgroups. That's pretty phenomenal. And then for Parent Core, family engagement and social emotional development, especially in a post-pandemic world, this just feels incredibly critical. And what we know is that by partnering families to support kids' social emotional development, Parent Core kids are actually more likely to read on grade level, again, back to the literacy, and less likely to experience mental health problems. So, you know, we're really just scratching the surface in all three of these providers. Like we can say that they're scaling, they're growing, that's great, but we're still nowhere near meeting the need. And the impact that they're delivering is critical, truly critical. So that's why we're excited.
I am excited now too. Thank you. Dana, you were kind of beginning to touch on this with your last answer, but you know, what excites you about Fluent Seeds?
Yeah, I mean, Steph just nailed it, really. I'm incredibly excited about all three organizations today. So thrilled to be in this space. And what drew us to Fluent Seeds, 10 years ago was that it was really deeply rooted in the science as well. And really, there are a lot of emerging conversations nationally and locally around how literacy develops and the best strategies we use to support children's literacy development. And I love that Fluent Seeds is really anchored in that science while still honoring child development and the importance of play and the social emotional domains. And similarly, it focuses on the adults and children. They define quality interactions as one in which both the adult and child are confident and capable. They have what they need and they're supporting each other. We've always loved that their PD cycle included both training, coaching, lots of opportunities to practice. We're noticing that educators and practitioners, internalize those strategies quicker because those elements are in place, and it's been rigorously tested. So it's been externally evaluated and proven, as Steph mentioned, to be effective across subgroups of children, which supports our North Star of all kids being kindergarten ready. So yeah, really excited to learn more about them and to be in this space.
Thank you. I think all three of you really enjoyed kind of this opening conversation. I'm gonna now ask you to step back for a minute as I welcome and introduce our providers to the conversation. So let's see. So to provide a little bit more detail on what the three models that Dana, Steph, and Liz were just referencing, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our provider panelists to the conversation, starting with Emily Grunt, who is filling in today for Kate Horst, the Executive Director of Fluent Seeds. Emily serves as Program Director of Fluent Seeds, drawing on her experiences teaching kindergarten and transitional kindergarten for 9 years, and also serving for 7 years as a coach and trainer at Fluent Seeds. Next, I'd like to welcome Kaima Hamer. Kaima is a licensed special education teacher and practitioner leader with more than 20 years of experience who promotes evidence-based strategies with Black, Brown, and immigrant urban populations across New York City. She currently serves as Associate Director of Parent Corps, where she's helping to build an emerging national presence for the organization. And then welcome also to Dr. Deborah Long. Deb is the co-founder and president of Tools of the Mind and professor emerita of psychology at Metropolitan State University of Denver, where she taught for 36 years in the psychology department and also in the Department of Education. And again, just a reminder that longer bios for all three of these panelists, as well as our three previous panelists, are posted in a link in the chat box, because I'm just scratching the surface on the great work that they've done. So we just got a quick teaser about each of your organizations from the funder panelists today, but I know there's so much more to share. So for those of us who are joining us today, who might not be familiar with your programs, can you each share what your organizations do and where your work fits in with the early childhood space? Kaima, let's start with you for this one. Oh, and you're on mute.
Thank you.
Yes, webinar until that happens once.
Yes, great. It's good to be with everybody. You can call me Kai for short. And I'll start with our mission. Parent Corps transforms the pre-K experience by helping schools partner with families to build a future where all children thrive. Parent Corps is evidence-based and has been rigorously tested in 2 RCTs and was shown to have long-term positive outcomes on children's mental health and academic achievement. Our program is comprised of 3 parts. There's a parenting program for pre-K caregivers designed to support families to promote children's early learning and development. There's a classroom social emotional learning program for pre-K students to help them communicate their feelings and develop a positive sense of self. But neither of those are delivered before educators engage with our professional development, which is highly experiential, rooted in the value and values that educators bring to the table, and supports teachers to form culturally responsive relationships with families and promote social emotional well-being for children. There's a value for kids being ready for school, and we heard the funder speak of that. But schools also have to be ready for kids, and Parent Corps' professional development supports that. Clearly, our audience is pre-K, and that is intentional because that is often families' first introduction to formal education. There's a high level of excitement, enthusiasm, and buy-in at the start of entry to school. And we want to capture families and get them involved from the beginning so that they are more likely to stay involved all the way up the grades.
I love that, starting off with a positive experience so that we can keep them engaged throughout. Deb, can you tell us a little bit about Tools of the Mind?
Sure, I hope I'm set up. We've been around a pretty long time. Since 1996, Tools began as a faculty project for Dr. Bodrova and I, and over the years, we've had a tremendous amount of support from philanthropy, which has helped us to grow. Our program is a pre-K and K program, and we combine a comprehensive curriculum with robust professional development. We develop self-regulated learners with an emphasis on executive functions that support both cognitive and social development and academic skills. We have multi-level activities, so children of varying levels of ability engage in the same. Sorry for that dinging sound. I thought I turned off the messages. So we have multi-level activities, so children of varying ages can engage in the same activity, and they receive scaffolding to meet their individual needs, and that's what PD involves, helping teachers learn scaffolding. Children in our program learn to play and play to learn. We build a community of learners, and for us that means that every child learns to interact and accept all the other children in the classroom, and they learn how to become friends and have working relationships. We also teach children to learn how to learn, because in kindergarten they have to start to make the transition to formal schooling in first grade. We combine the science of reading and math with the science of learning, and we serve over 40,000 kids a year with 90% program retention for the last 10 years. So next slide. So we are at the nexus of cutting edge neuroscience, whole child development, and a cohesive set of theoretical principles. And so we're pleased that we have been one of the first programs to show that executive function can be affected by a classroom program. And the research on our project, which I have put up here, examples, have shown that executive function is malleable, and that we've contributed to the evidence that shows how important it is in later achievement, as well as the child's well-being and growth as an adult. And so we've shown that you can close the achievement gap, that you can actually change the trajectory of learning in the next grade, that you can increase positive behavior and reduce behavior problems in the classroom by emphasizing executive functions. You can reduce stress hormones in children to a normal level in at-risk children, and you can increase teacher efficacy and feelings of professionalism. So that's Tools of the Mind.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Emily, can you tell us a little bit about Fluent Seeds?
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for having me today. I'm excited to represent Fluent Seeds this morning, or afternoon for many of you. Fluent Seeds is a professional development organization. Our mission is to ensure every child is a fluent reader by grade 3. Our professional development model focuses on quality interactions and the science of reading. Fluent Seeds pedagogy was designed from the science that has been taught about the brain and quality interactions. Seeds is a mnemonic that you can see on the screen that supports equilibrium through quality-based interactions so that both adults and children are feeling respected, capable, confident, and loved. And we are, in our trainings, we develop through social emotional, language and literacy, and math learning. Our professional development model supports building healthy habits for our interactions using multiple tiers of support for equitable outcomes for all our children. We define quality interactions when children and adults are confident and capable. We have a curriculum agnostic framework for quality interactions and the early literacy skills of language, phonological awareness, phonics, alphabet, and vocabulary. Fluent Seeds professional model is proven by an RCT study. We have frameworks that are specific to educators working with children 3 to 5, educators working with infants and toddlers, family child care providers, coaching, and parenting. And so we know that it takes a whole village to get the outcomes for children that we need, and our frameworks can provide that.
Thanks so much for that introduction. So a key focus of this conversation is high quality early learning environments. So from your points of view, what makes a high quality early learning environment, and how do each of your organizations make that possible? And Emily, we'll stay with you to start with this one off.
All right, thank you. Fluent Seeds creates a high quality environment through training and coaching adults. We know that humans are predisposed to being in trusting relationships to master new learning. Seeds teaches and coaches quality, balanced interactions of the art and the science of teaching. SEEDS caregivers build habits to structure the environment so that children can successfully pursue their current stage of learning within a trusting relationship so that they can safely and creatively play as they pursue their new learning. We represent quality interactions with two hands. One hand represents the science, what children need to learn to be kindergarten ready. And again, that's the vocabulary, letter knowledge, phonological awareness, book and print concepts, and oral language. The other hand is our SEEDS balance of being sensitive, being aware, encouragement through affirmations and acknowledgement, and then using those two interactions to begin the teaching, the education with our early literacy and math skills. We also pair that with development through doing, which includes talking, writing, reading, and singing, so that the child immediately gets to hold a pencil and try what they've learned, as well as the adult can leave one of our professional development trainings and do something the next day. We do that through transition songs, repeated read alouds, and again, having the materials to do what you learned in your trainings. When done in a balanced interaction, we both children and adults feel stronger self-image of their confidence and capability. We support high-quality learning environments through our proven professional development system using knowledge, model, and practice, and then pairing that with in-classroom observation and twice monthly coaching around building our up SMART goals. And then our coaches go in and they can model what you learned in your training. They can observe and give feedback. They can give support for what we do next. And then when educators have all of the support that in their skill development cycle, we know that they leave feeling confident and capable.
Thank you. Love it. Kai, what would you add?
So we believe that high quality early learning environments begin with the adults who own that early learning space. With Parent Corps, we aim to build the capacity of the adults in children's lives to create safe, nurturing, and predictable environments for them. If we're talking about classrooms, that adult is the teacher. We want teachers to consider that who they are is how they teach. We actually say that who you are is how you teach. And what that means is that you carry with you at every moment your values, your beliefs, and belief systems. And you got to get in touch with what those really are, because they show up in the quality of the interactions with children as you teach them and with their families as you engage with them every single day. Parent Corps has 5 essential elements that we hold in the work we do with educators and caregivers, and they include building authentic relationships, understanding race and racism, honoring culture, sharing the science of early childhood, and practicing self-reflection. This is our special sauce. And when we hold true to these essential elements, we have the power to transform the way educators think, believe, teach, and engage, thereby transforming the quality of early learning environments for children.
I love it. I'm having a hard time finding my unmute button, but thank you for that. I love the focus on the adults and who you are is how you teach. Deb, what would you add?
Great. Can you bring up the next slide? Thanks. So when we started Tools in the Mind, that we were college professors, and we realized that early childhood is a time of tremendous diversity in the children and their capacities as they come into preschool and kindergarten, diversity in the families. This is their first experience with school. We have lots of different ethnic groups and minorities, and lots of different kinds of families come. And also there's a tremendous variation in the teaching force, because you have everyone from, we train paraprofessionals and aides as well as teachers, but we also train administrators as well as special ed people, because we work a lot in the public schools. So there's a tremendous diversity in all of the people that are involved. So one of the things that we realize is that we couldn't just have a set of curriculum activities, that we had to actually embed the teaching practices that we wanted teachers to learn, because to do tools, it's really a paradigm shift in the way you think about a lot of child behavior. As being driven by lack of executive functions and being reactive and not having inhibitory control, as opposed to seeing it as being aggressive behavior or having an aggressive child, for example. So we embedded the teaching practices that promote executive functions in the program. PD forms a very, very important point. A part of teaching teachers how to support children in the classroom. We use data, and we really try to change the way the entire classroom functions, in addition to changing the way children interact with materials.
Thank you. So like we discussed earlier in the conversation when I was speaking with the funders, childcare staffing shortages continue to be an incredible challenge and reality nationwide, even as private sector employment has fully rebounded post-COVID. How does professional development help address teacher retention in early childhood? And how do each of you measure what's working in terms of that? And Deb, let's stay with you to start this one off.
Great. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, you have it up. Thanks. So for us, and I think it's clear that my colleagues in these also agree that teacher retention is addressed by helping teachers create a better functioning classroom where they feel more confident about their own interactions with children. And the faster, I think the key too is that it's difficult to get that going right away, because you're trying to train the teacher to learn certain ways of doing things, and at the same time the children are still doing what they were doing. And so you have teachers that lack confidence in letting go of some of the things they're doing and adopting new practices. So teacher, it's addressed by really creating this functioning classroom by combining what's going on in the class with their learning. So there's this feeling of forward progress, so that teachers start to see learning happening in a really joyful way. And changing that is what changes the sense of efficacy of the teacher and causes a virtuous circle, which actually makes them want to change more. And then you have a more effective classroom, and it just goes on from there. The next slide, please. So part of this is really embedding, creating a embedded individualized professional development program that really partners with the program, because we have to realize, I think as one of the funders mentioned, we don't want this to be an extractive process, but to actually be part of what helps the entire program grow. So it has to, PD has to be designed to fit the schedule of the program. It has to accommodate different levels of experience of teachers. It has to accommodate different teachers' learning styles. Do they like to see videos? Do they read about activities? And it also has to be on demand. They also need a network of support that can facilitate the development of all the teachers together in the classroom as the community of learners. And then individualized professional development should occur as well. So we have a virtual coaching system for our teachers that we use. And next slide. I think I have one more slide on this. And the way we measure it is that we use a virtual coaching system that allows teachers to have cycles of interaction with a coach from Tools on those kinds of skills and competencies that cross different activities, but allow the teacher to grow in their ability to foster executive functions and increase positive child outcomes.
Thank you. I love this visual. Yeah, this is wonderful. Emily, how does Fluent Seeds do this?
Thank you, Sarah. Professional development is intended to support educators. When the adults working with children are well supported, they stay longer. We at Fluent Seeds use this model that you see on the screen of training, coaching, collecting data, and using the results to inform instruction. We also carry on our Seeds quality relationships and interactions and balance throughout our training. We want it to live in the professional development series, in the classroom with teacher to child, teacher to teacher, teacher to leader, teacher to coach. I use it with my 7 sister-in-laws as well. Those quality interactions are what keep people coming back. We know that educators are confident and capable by collecting coaching data, training data, and child data. And we have been able to use benchmark data in the fall, winter, and spring, as well as progress monitoring data with children receiving these supplemental interventions in our framework. Our dashboard for coaches collects teacher data on the quality of implementation and the SMART goals that they've made with their coach throughout the year. We use that in a skill development cycle for growth for the knowledge of our early childhood interactions. This data helps the teachers, the tutors in the classrooms know about the individual child mastery and help support decisions, ensuring that we can tailor our approach to give all children what they need when they need it. What we have seen is our teachers and tutors are taught the tools and strategies through our professional development series of 9 3-hour sessions. And then we use data and modeling to inform decision-making. The decision-making is individualized for small groups and individual children, as well as for what coaching the teacher needs to know what intervention or activity they can do in the classroom that is supported by the early literacy foundations that our children need, as well as what the teachers can use with the brain science of learning. They are able to implement these strategies immediately into their classrooms with support of coaching, as well as support of our tools that we have. The SEED strategies are effective, improve child outcomes, and are reliable year after year. Teachers and tutors build their efficacy and are excited about the results that they see, and then that empowers them as they see their children and the pride in which the children are showing in their growth, as well as what they've seen, what they've done in their classrooms, and it inspires them to keep coming back to our professional learning and coaching series, as well as stay in the classroom because they can see immediate change.
Thanks. I love that the idea of seeing that you're having an impact, seeing that you're being successful in your work is probably one of the best retention strategies there is. Kai, what would you add to this in terms of how the professional development is helping to address teacher retention?
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak to the measurement of teacher retention. Parent Corps does not measure that, but I can speak from my experience. I taught for 11 years in a public school in the Bronx. I sat in countless professional development sessions. The worst ones made me feel like I was a kid myself, where facilitators would talk at me and bombard me with information that didn't feel relevant to what I faced each day. Teachers are professionals. They've worked hard to earn degrees and certifications, and they show up, rain, sleet, hail, snow, to not only teach, but to love. And like any other professionals, they need to feel validated, respected, and recognized in order to be retained. And Liz said earlier, they need to be paid well. Good professional development honors teachers' expertise and builds on skills and strengths they already have. At Parent Corps, we work hard to make sure that teachers feel supported and are armed with strategies that really work. So hopefully they choose to stay and teach another day. I left teaching to come to Parent Corps because it's the real deal. And we're looking for funding partners to invest in our national scale and grow this good work.
Thanks. Fair, good compensation. Another really important retention strategy. Let's be clear. So what has philanthropic funding enabled each of your organizations to accomplish in the past? And what are each of your organizations hoping to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years? What challenges and or opportunities do you anticipate in that time? And how can philanthropy support your work? We've got some funders on the call here. We've got funders as the panel. What role can they play to support you all in that work? And Kai, let's stay with you to start this one.
Yeah, Sarah, I was starting my pitch. And the answer to that, our last question, philanthropic support is core to our funding model. Over the years and currently, philanthropy has supported parts of our research and continued learning agenda, our programming, as well as a portion of general operating and growth costs. In 2020, we launched a 3-year strategic growth plan to scale across the nation through Head Start grantees and school districts with a mix of philanthropy and public contracts. We've made some key hires, including new expertise we needed to help catalyze our growth and improved organizational infrastructure conducive to scaling. And in the next 3 to 5 years, we will bring our national growth to fruition. The biggest challenge we've all faced, has been COVID, and that's no surprise. Its impact on school systems, families, and children has been devastating, and the ripples will reverberate for years to come. But in that challenge, there is opportunity. Opportunity for ParenCore's professional development, our parenting program, and our Friend School classroom curriculum to bolster teachers and caregivers' ability to support the social emotional health of pre-K children and improve the overall health and their academic achievement, which the pandemic made worse. The time is now. We don't have a minute more to waste. We are actively seeking new values-aligned funding partners to accelerate this vision and support our national growth.
Thank you. Did you have another slide that you wanted to touch on here?
Nope, this slide just surmises what the ask is and what the need is. So those two cover it. I get right to the point, Sarah, right to the point.
I like it. I like it. So Deb, what would you add in terms of the role of philanthropy?
So can you put up my first slide? So I think we're like Fluent Seeds. We began in 1996 with 4 local funders in Colorado. And I thought back on this, actually, they funded us for more than 20 years, all 4 of them, and they're still funders of ours. At the beginning, we were kind of a classic. We started with just an idea as our faculty project, and then we incubated into a nonprofit incubator, and then finally we became a nonprofit ourselves. So most of our funding now comes to support our general operations. It comes from school and program contracts, almost 85 to 90%. So at this point, philanthropy is really involved in 2 different things. It helps us to grow our scale and impact, and has helped us create relationships with other people doing research in this area, linkage to other groups such as the Harvard Center on the Developing Child and the Stanford Institute on Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence are examples of programs we sponsored with. They enable us to invest in our organizational capacity so we can grow, because our contracts cover just providing services to schools. And so the second way that funding has been really important is in innovation. And so the next slide, please. So it has allowed us to develop some interesting apps to support teachers. We developed a reading and writing app so that as children engage in reading and writing in the classroom, and data is collected to summarize what children have learned in that practice experience, and those go to a dashboard so that teachers can quickly use the formative evaluation to change instruction for the next day. For example, we developed a technology to support teachers. The iScaffold, which is like a coach in your pocket, provides on-demand information designed to allow teachers with different learning styles to access the program as they need it. It actually even has a do not panic button, and we answer that in 24 hours, we promise. And I told you about the TREE program is also part of what philanthropy funded. Next slide, please. We also developed a program that we started during the COVID shutdown to help teachers and parents communicate over the activities that parents were implementing at home. So teachers and parents can simultaneously text each other over videos that parents posted on this Tools learning platform, and it simultaneously translates the text into 100 different languages, so you feel like you're texting with somebody who speaks your language and actually you're texting with somebody who may not. And the last slide is the challenge. I had a slide that has challenges and opportunities for us in Tools. Of course, we would hope for philanthropic support to keep growing, but and doing what we're doing now. But I felt it was worth putting up some of the challenges for our field, and which are, the push down curriculum, a narrow interpretation of the science of reading, and high teacher and child stress. But I'll stop here because I've used my 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Well, like the patient funding, the innovation funding, and to make scaling possible as well. So Emily, what would you add in terms of kind of what philanthropic funding has allowed Fluent Seeds to do, where you're hoping to go in the next 3 to 5 years, challenges, opportunities?
Well, first want to say to Deb that I need a do not panic button for life. I love that so much. And I also want to thank and give great gratitude to the funders that have given to us over the years to get us where we are currently. The philanthropic funding that we have been given has enabled our organization to perfect our training and our coaching. It has given us the opportunity to revise and make our materials more culturally relevant in the classroom for both teachers and children. We have been able to create virtual and asynchronous models to serve English and Spanish learners. We've created a coaching dashboard that collects coaching data, which promotes quality improvement in using our frameworks. Plus, we have been able to do some evaluations of our impact with partners for an RTC study, as well as some other studies to have our work research backed. And we've been able to get greater outcomes with the funding. During the pandemic, we learned that technology could and did increase access to professional development for some of our educators. With this knowledge, we've been able to create the e-learning asynchronous modules so that teachers can do it at their own pace, as well as districts, pre-Ks and centers have the ability to have their teachers pick the times that are best for them to do the training, as well as not impact their daily schedules. And I would say, like everyone said today, that has been done with some stipends for teachers so that if they're doing it on their own time, they can choose, and then they also get compensated. So we would continue to encourage that in our plans. Facilitate many virtual trainings across the nation, as well as some national trainings where we can provide it for more than just certain centers, and have virtual coaching options. So we're able to coach virtually as well. Over the next 3 to 5 years, we want to continue to explore how technology can increase the workforce, increase the sense of community in the early childhood spaces, and increase children's kinder readiness. Philanthropy can support our work with evaluation on what works for coaching interactions and how to coach for impact using our skill development cycle. Funding to create and leverage technology and what is responsive to an already stressed system and workforce would be really helpful in balancing the need for responsive relationships as well as mastery, motivation, and the content. And so again, thank you for this opportunity, and to our funders.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thank you to all of our provider panelists for that incredible overview of your work, where you're headed, and the progress that you've made and the ways that you're responding to challenges. Before we transition to Q&A, but mentioning Q&A, I just want to encourage all of you who are listening in to this conversation. If you've got any questions kind of stirring in your mind, please be sure to drop those in the Q&A box. We'll be transitioning there in just a second. But I'd like to quickly welcome our funder panelists back into the conversation before we make that transition. And I'd invite you all to share your reflections on what you just heard from the providers in general, but especially in relation to that kind of the roles that philanthropy can play to support this work. And who'd like to go first? Just unmute and jump in.
I can kick us off. I also really want that don't panic button. And separately, Emily, you have 7 sister-in-laws. That's like a crazy number, so we can circle back to that later. But Dana, I think you mentioned these like 4 funding principles, and one of them was really about like offering PD in traditional and non-traditional settings. And it just sounds like a lot of this capital is really going to innovate to be able to do that, to expand those opportunities and to just test different models and see what works. And we don't know what we don't know, and that just feels really, really powerful. So I hope other funders feel compelled to contribute funds so that we can continue testing and just finding deeper impact and different models that can scale further.
Yeah, I think connected to that, I think I'm just in awe of the growth and the development that these organizations today have been able to do with such thoughtful attention to adult learning theory and the science of child development that's just coming through so clearly. And it just lifts up for me, as Steph said, the importance of investing early so that organizations can do the research and the development and the trial and the error that's necessary to grow and to be really responsive to children's needs, adults' needs, and communities' needs, because we know every community is unique. So I'm sitting in that appreciation. We definitely, as a foundation, want to continue to support innovative solutions and that development. And I'm thinking too about a Q&A question, how that connects to like business development for childcare providers too. So I know we'll get there.
Yeah, I agree with what my colleagues just said. It's interesting to hear these through lines and these patterns in our conversation about what kids need for learning, which is safe, trusting environments and relationships and a place to try things. And then we think about all of these programs have talked about one of the elements of the secret sauce is coaching and an opportunity to practice and get feedback. And that's exactly the same as how young children learn. And then I just would like to extend that logic to how organizations work too. And so that's where that innovation, that funding for innovation comes in. We have to be able to try things and get feedback, see if it works, see if it feels right, see if the community is responding positively to it, and adjust. And for that work to happen in the context of safe, trusting, positive relationships, because that is how learning occurs for all of us, whether we're young students, early childhood educators, funders, or folks running organizations.
Thank you. So we're transitioning into the Q&A portion right now. And I'd like to start off with a question posed by Barbara Reisman. How, if at all, is the PD that teachers and staff are receiving from these programs linked to credentials and additional compensation? So I don't know if, and Deb, can you turn your camera back on so that you can join us for this part too? But yeah, who would like to start off a response to that?
I can start. So in sort of the questions we received, I talked a lot about the desire for national scale, but in the last 6 years, Parent Corps was really focused on deep scale in New York City through Pre-K for All. And in New York City, with our tools, we were able to reach all 70,000 pre-K families, children and families. And with our professional development, we touched 450 programs. And we were able to have the teachers who came to our professional development over those 6 years receive CTLE credits through the Department of Education for New York City. So I'm hopeful that as we scale and go to new systems, we'll be able to do that as well. We also, our newest innovation is self-guided professional development modules. I heard someone else speak of that. I think Emily did. And Parent Corps has those as well. We haven't started yet to see if we could get those accredited. So if a teacher is able to do those on their own, be able to receive credits, I think it has to be 2 hours. We're just doing the investigation of what it takes and also investigating national credentialing, because some of it is state by state. You know, the education has, every state has their own education department, which has different rules and regulations to accreditation. And if you can, you know, get credits or an additional compensation based off of those credits. We're just in the baby stages of doing that, thinking of national scale, but we were able to do it in New York City, the largest school district in the country. So there's some hope.
Thanks.
We do the same thing in Tools of the Mind, where we go through the school system and or the state, and teachers get professional development credits for it. We've also begun a credential program within Tools itself, where teachers can work on different competencies, and then they can receive an endorsement and then in Tools. And we are looking into providing credit towards master's degrees and undergraduate degrees in education through continuing education credit through universities.
At Fluent Seeds, we give certificates for the amount of minutes and hours that they are in professional development with us, as well as with coaching. In our 3 to 5 year plan that Sarah, you asked us about earlier, we are looking for accreditation to change that into units, and that is in the works. We also partner with programs like the Early Literacy Kings in Oakland, where they have young men that learn seeds and go through financial literacy, our professional development of literacy, to make a pipeline for the men to go into teaching positions and credentials. And so we also partner in the work with others. And like I said, it's a goal of ours to get accredited in the near future. Hopefully by the end of this year. We're in the works.
That's the very near future.
Can
Funders.
I add something really
Yes.
quickly to that? I think in some cases, states can and maybe should, I don't like to use the should word, but there's an opportunity for states to connect the professional development to credentials and to credits at institutes of higher ed through direct partnership models with accredited universities. So there's an advocacy opportunity. That's a role funders can play. It's a role everybody on this call can play, supporting states in linking professional development that they're providing and funding to credits through institutes of higher ed, which they can pay for, and then connecting that to a salary increase.
Steph or Dana, either of you want to weigh in on? Okay. Sorry, it's not a webinar unless you forget to unmute or accidentally remute. So Alan Gutman has shared kind of partially a comment and a question, really saying, I think as Congress and states continue to propose initiatives with diverse delivery systems, i.e. center-based, public school-based, private, nonprofit, family, childcare, it's vital for solutions, it's vital that solutions be adapted to and appropriate for implementation across all of those delivery systems. In other words, not a one-size-fits-all solution. And now I feel like I have heard our providers responding or kind of agreeing with them and saying that a lot of this professional development is tailored to these different, or is responsive to these different delivery systems. So anything that you all would like to add to reinforce that point?
I would say that, so I really think this is important because one of the ways that we're going to recruit teachers is also to look at the paraprofessional base and the teacher aide base as a really strong recruiting ground. And if we train them, it sounds like my colleagues also do that in their programs. Their training and their learning of the fundamentals sometimes starts in the classroom, and they don't go the traditional route where they're studying it in school or going to college. And I feel that that's why it is so important to address the variety of different types of learners that are in the workforce, and not just aiming it at the teachers themselves, but at everyone. So I really agree with the importance of having a really varied delivery system and a varied approach to training and professional development.
If I might add on to what Deb was saying about how Fluent Seeds has done that work here in Oakland, we partner with a parent advocacy group, the Oakland Reach, and they are doing fellowships and recruiting parents in the communities and neighborhoods of where the schools are. And when we partner with them and they bring families and they do mini workshops with them, and one of their workshops is around that we hold is the early literacy framework. What do children need to be readers, about social emotional, about being in relationships so children are ready to learn. And we, in that partnership, are able to cast a wider net of getting the aunties, the grandmas, the mothers, everyone that is at the school that cares and wants to educate their children into the fold to have positions as tutors or literacy liberators in the classrooms. And so we've been able to, like you said, Deb, go in a non-traditional route of getting folks that are educators in their own right and give them a little bit more details of how to teach reading.
If I could add on, I remember learning with Fluent Seeds, and Kai spoke to this a little bit earlier about what do learning spaces consist of and look like for different stakeholders who are supporting children in our communities. And so, as Kai mentioned, professional development, as in our minds, there's a pretty specific image of what that looks like. And one of the things that Fluent Seeds had to do as they were engaging families is kind of deconstruct that idea of what is professional development. Who holds the knowledge, who holds the power, who holds the expertise, and how do we share that across instead of traditional professional development formats. So I really appreciate that question, because it's a real issue that organizations grapple with.
Anyone else? Kai?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think what I heard underneath the question was, Parent Corps, we focus on pre-K, but what about before that? What professional development opportunities look like for center-based care, for sort of even informal home care, which has like tremendous impact on children, and they're not in a traditional education setting, but you have adults who are impacting children every single day. And how do we reach those adults? Because there's no, schools are easier. Even in Head Start centers where pre-K, where Parent Corps does its work, you have that, there's an organizational structure there. There is some form of a nexus. And there's places that children go to every day that's not so. Parent Corps is testing through our place-based initiative in Sunset Park. We're testing and considering what pieces of our core programming can be adapted in earlier learning settings. We don't know for sure. Our home base, our sweet spot is pre-K, but we are doing that learning as we speak and excited about it.
Thank you. And so just flagging for all of you who are listening in, our evaluation poll that Sierra mentioned in the opening just popped up. So really would love it if you could just take a quick second while we're continuing the conversation and share your thoughts and feedback with us. That would be great. One more question. quickly wanted to get back to the question of compensation. So, and possibly the funder role. So I'd like to hear more about compensation. Who has had success in accessing public dollars for compensation? Can funders help with that kind of advocacy? From Patricia Rupert. Anybody want to respond to that quickly?
I have a sort of a clarifying question about the question. Is it public funding in order for teachers to be paid more, or for educators, or for, to be paid more when we say compensation? I know it's not your question. I was just questioning the question.
That was how to make sure that educators are better compensated and where there's opportunity for public funding. But that's just how I'm reading it. So I hope that's right.
I'm happy to start off. I mean, there are a couple elements that we think a lot about. There's the narrative shift, right? And that drives public opinion about our value of early child care educators. And so there's that like shifting narrative work that needs to happen. In Oakland, a number of funded organizations that were advocacy organizations. And so just this year, we were able to pass a city measure that pulls in roughly $30 million annually to early child care settings. And part of that money will go to increasing the early childhood educator wages. So I think there's definitely opportunity. I think one of the things that we struggled with as a foundation before the measure passed was like, we could spend our entire budget on increasing wages and not even make a dent. So that's where we started to explore what are the narrative shifts that need to happen, and what are the policy shifts and the measures that we can support, or organizations who are pushing measures that can really make systemic change in that area.
Thanks. Anybody else want to add to that? I might try to squeeze in one last really quick question for our funders in our remaining moments together. Somebody, Ann Walter asked, as a smaller funder, we focused on funding childcare or program providers themselves. How do you think about maximizing the impact in supporting frontline childcare providers versus the providers of professional development? Steph, looks like you're moving. No? Sorry, yeah.
I can take a stab at this. Firstly, just thank you for doing that, for supporting child care centers and providers on the front lines. I think it's, I don't want to put these two things in tension because I think we have different roles to play. So from the national funder perspective, it's very difficult for us to diligence and manage grants at that level in an equitable way across the country. And so that is why we've sort of focused on this next tier of providers who can then support the subsequent frontline workers, to your point. So I really don't think of it as a trade-off in impact. I think we have to work together in concert. And actually, this is something that we're talking about all the time. What does that national local funder partnership look like, where, maybe we can subsidize the cost of bringing something like, a Fluency, a Parent Corps, a Tools of the Mind to your centers that you are funding more, and thinking about how that scale looks and how we work together more importantly, because no funder can do all of the things, even though all of the things are so worth doing. I wish we could. Yeah, maybe that's where I'll pause.
And I'll just build on that, funder to funder conversations are designed for kind of nationally focused funders and local funders. And so a local funder could know the childcare programs in my community, invest in them, and then, take advantage of the investments that you all are making in the PD providers to strengthen that as well. Any other?
I'll just
go.
Extend what I shared before. For us as a local funder, we really think long and hard about this. And so I appreciate that your foundation has provided that support. And I think, the decision we made was to push on policy in case we're not here, in 10 years. We don't want, wages to be reduced. So for us, it was like really push on policies that could support lasting change. So the measure that was passed, is in effect for 30 years before it comes up for vote again. So that felt like a big win.
All right, well, thank you all. We have run out of our 90 minutes together. I could continue this for another hour and a half, I'm sure, but I wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists, to our funders, Dana Chalono, Stephanie Sharp, Liz Stevens, and to our amazing provider panelists, Emily Grunt, Kai Hamer, and Deb Leong. And thank you to all of you who joined in and listened to this conversation. I'm loving seeing lots of the positive chats. Or comments coming in the chat box. So I'm hopeful that you all were as inspired and informed as I was by today's conversation. I'd encourage all of you to tune back in later on this afternoon. We've been talking a lot about relationships and supporting educators in trauma as a way to support children's literacy. This afternoon conversation is kind of building on that by focusing on well-being as a foundation for learning recovery and literacy development. Also encourage everyone to join us next week for a session in partnership with Ed Week, focused on public housing. And then definitely be sure to tune back in on November 29th. If you're excited by learning about tools of the mind, because Deb Leong will be back with us to share more on a session focused on kindergarten as a critical moment and how we can ensure that year helps to support children moving from high quality early learning environments into success in the early grades. We've dropped some links in the chat box. I'll redrop them in again because I just saw somebody asking about that. But thank you all again for joining us. Thank you to our amazing panel. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing.